Constantine, here is Marguerite. Now that's a woman's voice. It's pulled off of a tape recording, and the woman speaking is dead. Her name was Marguerite Petrowski. She worked at the side of this man's wife for 10 years. Then she got sick, and then she was gone. Not long after they put her in the ground, she started turning up on his tape recordings. Marguerite follows you. Please pray for Marguerite's soul. Always the same deceased woman, surfacing on recording after recording, always calling out for the same man. And the man holding the recorder, Constantine Raudive. Now, before you write this off as one grieving man hearing things, look at what we're actually dealing with. This isn't a seance. There's no candles. There's no spirit board. It's a tape recorder, a radio that's tuned to dead air, and a microphone in an empty room. And Marguerite isn't the only one because she's not the only voice. Over 5 years, Raudive catches and writes down more than 72,000 similar recordings. 72,000 voices, fragments of speech. Some surface over and over again. Some, like Marguerite, come back again and again. They come in fast, twice the speed of a human being. They switch languages in the middle of a single sentence, and the names they call out belong to people everyone in that room knew to be dead. This is something science couldn't put down, because Raudive isn't a mystic. He's a philosopher, a novelist, a student of Carl Jung, and he doesn't hide this thing. He hands it to physicists and engineers and dares them to debunk it. Now they try. They lock the whole experiment inside a Faraday cage. It's a sealed metal room. It's built to shut out every radio wave and outside signal on Earth. If those voices were sneaking in through some hidden broadcast, the cage ends it. Surprisingly, the voices come through anyway, and the physicists are left with the only conclusion nobody wanted. The voices are coming from outside the man, and we can't explain how. And then, visitors started showing up. Twice, American engineers turn up at his door. They're asking sharp, strange questions, giving almost nothing back. It's curious. This is a respected scientist who said he recorded the voices of the dead. The laboratories that lined up to prove him a fool couldn't. And there's one question 50 years hasn't put to rest. Were the voices just in his head, or were they answering him back? I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. I want to know more about Constantine Raudive and his electronic voice phenomenon recordings. I want to know if his recordings actually picked up the voices of deceased individuals, because the strangest part of this story is what happened to the voices after Raudive died himself. Stay with me. So where does a thing like this even begin? I can tell you right now, it's not with Raudive. It actually starts with a man in Sweden named Fredrik Jörgensen. Sweden, 1959. Jörgensen is a film producer, and one afternoon he carries a tape recorder out into the countryside to record bird song. That's all he's after, birds. He plays the tape back later. The birds are there, so are the voices. He knows that he never recorded voices, but they're there. His first thought is a rational one. Stray radio, some signal leaking in, but the more he actually listens, the worse that explanation gets. The voices aren't random. They speak to him by name, and Fredrik Jörgensen becomes the first man on record to say out loud that he caught the dead on tape. Now, this is a claim that takes a very particular type of person to take seriously. And Constantine Raudive was about the last man you'd expect. He was Latvian, was born dirt poor. He clawed his way into the finest universities in Europe, Paris, Madrid, Edinburgh. He published 7 books in German. He married Zenta Marina, one of the most important writers Latvia ever produced. She translated every book he wrote. And when the Soviet army came for Latvia, he ran. He spent the rest of his life in exile. So this is a hard-nosed, classically trained scholar, the kind of man who hears the dead are speaking on tape and assumes someone's pulling his leg. So he goes to prove it. June 1965, Raudive travels to Jörgensen's estate in Sweden, and not to believe him, to catch him in the trick. They wire a tape recorder to the radio, they tune it to a dead channel, just static, and then let it run. For days they get next to nothing, just garbled scraps. And then, the night of June 10th, they play the tape back, and down in the static is a fragment. A man's name is called out. Women's voices. More than one language all at once. And the last voice is a woman. She says, "Va a dormir, Marguerite." Go to sleep, Marguerite. Marguerite Petrowski died not long before. And the skeptic, the man who came to expose a con, he later writes that this was the moment that it all changed. This is the voice that started it, and Marguerite would come back to him again and again and again. So he stops trying to tear it down, and he starts trying to build it up on his own, from scratch. He goes back to Germany and turns his whole life into one long experiment. He records the voices 4 different ways. A microphone in a silent room, a radio parked between stations, a frequency transmitter, and the strangest of all of them, a diode. A diode's a little box about the size of 2 matchboxes, a chip of crystal, a couple inches of wire, a crude receiver. It's so simple it physically can't tune into a real station, so it pulls nothing but static. And the voices come through that one clearest of them all. Now I gotta be honest with you about this because it comes back later. These voices are hard to hear. They're faint, they're buried, they trip over each other. Raudive himself admitted that the average ear needs about 3 months of daily practice before he can reliably pick them all out. And that opens a door I can't close for you. If it takes months of training to hear a voice in the noise, how do you know you're finding a voice that's really there and not just teaching your brain to invent one? Hold on to that thought, because the day Raudive goes public, that's the first question the scientists throw at him. And in 1971, he goes very public. His work crosses into English, into a book, and it lands in the laps of people who own laboratories and who fully intend to prove him a fraud. That's where this gets serious. Set the science aside for a minute, forget the labs, forget the skeptics. We get all that. Right now, I got a question. What do 72,000 voices from the other side actually say? Because this is the part that almost nobody shows you. First thing you learn, they don't talk the way we talk. Raudive said that the voices speak their own language. He called it a kind of Esperanto. One short sentence welded together out of 4 or 5 languages at once. A little Latvian, a little German, a word in Swedish, a word in Russian. It's all crammed into a single breath. Here's a real one. Raudive asked a dead colleague, a Professor Frey, to say his own name onto the tape. And the voice comes back, "Frey, you sleep, you will not believe." It's half Swedish, half German. The dead man gives his name and then tells the living scientist he's asleep. Now, across all 72,000 recordings, one topic rises above all the others: mothers. It shows up again and again, the voices reaching out to their mothers, or speaking as them. Your mama, your mother, mother is with you, mother has a headache. And then one like this. A woman's voice is aimed right at Raudive. "I cannot sing for you, my dear, your little mother." Now that's a little scary. A dead mother saying she's sorry that she can't sing for her boy anymore. Now remember Marguerite? You heard her name at the very start of the video. The voice that follows him, that calls his name. Well, she was gone before any of this even started. And she doesn't say her piece and then leave. She moves in. Marguerite stands by your chair. She despairs. Then another almost gentle, "Marguerite, calm yourself. I stayed in the hospital." And then a pretty chilling line. A voice in the tape says, "Costa, speak softer. One hears." Speak softer. Like there's somebody on the other end of this thing who might get overheard. Then a voice cuts in with a warning. "Constantine, the first one is not real." A voice telling Raudive that one of his own voices is a fake. And it's not all grief and comfort. Some of the voices turn on Marguerite. They start tearing her down. They call her unfaithful. They call her worse things. One even announces itself as a detective reading off the sins of a dead woman. Nobody wrote that. Raudive just transcribed what was sitting on the tape, and some of these voices weren't calm. One said, "Help, help, look at me, yes, help me." Another, "Poor Latvian, we love you, Kosti." It's voices that sound like they want something from him, from us. And then the ones that seem to know exactly what's happening. Push them too hard, and you get this back. "Stop this, ask no more. We are not allowed to tell." Not allowed? By whom? Another one just warns him off the whole thing. Raudive, don't spy. Underneath it all are short, flat statements that are somehow the worst of the entire pile. We exist, we live, we, the dead. One night came a voice with what sounded like a warning. There are many of us here. Cling firmly to the earth. And the shortest answer to the biggest question any of us has, 3 words. They say, death is nothing, whatever that means. And it wasn't only the people Raudive loved. Names out of history started climbing up into the static as well. The philosopher Nietzsche over and over. Other names from recent past too. Ones that you'd recognize. Ones that maybe you'd rather not. Now here's the thing that tells you exactly what Raudive was. He flat out refused to interpret any of it. He never told you these were angels or demons. He logged the voice, he filed the code, and he moved on to the next one. 72,000 times. Facts, he wrote, are the servants of truth. He put the voices on the table and handed the verdict to everyone else. So the next people to get their hands on these tapes, they weren't priests or grieving families, they were engineers with instruments and a plan to catch Constantine Raudive faking it all. So Raudive has his 72,000 voices, and in 1971, he's ready to put a book in front of the world that says, flat out, these are the dead. The publisher is a man named Colin Smythe, and Smythe has a real problem. He's not about to stake his company's name on Voices of the Dead unless he hears it for himself. So before he prints a single page, he makes his own test recording, and he hears something, a voice, but he can't make out the words. So he hands the tape to his editor, a man named Peter Bander. Bander listens, and out of the static, a woman's voice comes through, in German. Why don't you open the door? Bander goes cold, because that's his mother's voice. His mother, who's dead. Here's the thing. The two of them used to mail tape recordings back and forth instead of letters, so he knew her voice better than almost anyone alive, and the message itself lands hard. Now, that very week, Bander was keeping his office door shut. His coworkers were poking fun of him about hiding away in there. A dead woman on a publisher's test tape tells her son to open the door. So now even the skeptics are pretty shook up, and Smythe decides that there's only one way forward. Test these voices harder than anybody ever has. Test one, Pi Records. Pi is a major British recording company. It's a real studio, real engineers. They put it in the hands of their two chief engineers, Ken Atwood and Ray Pritchett, and they lock it down. Raudive isn't allowed to touch the equipment at all. He's allowed to do one thing: speak into a microphone. And they shield the session against stray signals, high frequency, low frequency, the works. They hit record, and while the tape is rolling, every single person in the room hears the same thing: Constantine Raudive talking, and nothing else. Then they play it back, and on 18 minutes of tape, they count more than 200 voices. 200! On a recording where everyone present will swear that they heard one man speaking in a sealed room. Plenty of those voices were personal, pointed. They were aimed right at the people standing in that room. And according to Peter Bander, the place came apart. Nobody went home. They kept recording into the early morning hours. But Pi is a recording studio, and a skeptic can always say that a studio leaks signals. So in 1972, they raised the stakes one last time, as high as it can go. They take Raudive to Belling & Lee. Belling & Lee isn't a recording label. It's a defense electronics firm. And out at their plant in Enfield, England, they've got a very special room, a radio frequency screened laboratory, a chamber built to lock out every electromagnetic signal on Earth. It's the same room they use to test sensitive gear for the British military. If a radio is reeking into Raudive's tapes, the room kills it at the door. The man running the test is Peter Hale. Hale's not a believer. He's one of the top experts in the entire Western world on electronic screening and suppression. He walks in convinced. He figures that Raudive's voices are stray radio. Simple as that. So they use the lab's own equipment, brand new, factory fresh tape, sealed inside that room. And the voices show up anyway. Voices that Peter Hale had no earthly idea how to explain. And here's what Hale said afterward. From the results we obtained last Friday, something is happening which I cannot explain in normal physical terms. Think about that. The man brought in to debunk it, the screening expert, can't explain it. And these were serious people here. The people working on Raudive's experiments included a university physics professor named Alex Schneider, who already shared a scientific prize with Raudive for this same work. One of the most respected parapsychologists alive, Hans Bender, and an engineer who had already built a machine to hunt these very voices, a device he called the psychophone. People with real careers, real reputations, and nobody gambles on a hoax. So by 1972, it looks like Constantine Raudive has done the impossible. He carried the voices of the dead into the hardest laboratory in the country, and the laboratory blinked first. Case closed, right? Not so much. Because everything you just heard comes from the people who already believed him. And right about now, a very different set of scientists were getting ready to run the exact same sealed room test, and they walk out with the exact opposite answer. I told you a different set of scientists was coming, and here they are. And the first thing they do is take Raudive's single best trick and they run it back at him. The sealed room. Remember Belling & Lee, the defense lab? The voices that turned up there? A researcher at Cambridge named David Ellis decides to put the claim to the test. He sets the recorder inside a Faraday cage, the screened box that kills radio fields. Same idea, tighter controls. He runs the tape, and this time, nothing. No voices. No messages, No dead, it's just static. So now you've got 2 sealed rooms and 2 answers that can't both be true. So that's the crack that the skeptics drive a truck through. If the voices vanish the second you block the radio, then maybe they were nothing but the radio. Ellis is just getting started. He runs a second experiment. And this one should make ghost hunters a little uncomfortable. He sits a group of people down and plays them a recording, and he tells them that it's a lecture, a real lecture. It's just badly recorded and it's hard to make out. Do your best, he says, to write down what you hear. Now, spoiler alert, there's no lecture. It's just white noise, it's pure static, it's nothing at all. And his people hand back dozens of phrases, whole sentences, things that they were certain they heard out of nothing. Now think back all the way to the start of this video. I told you Raudive said that it took 3 months of practice to hear the voices. And I asked you a question. How do you know you're finding a voice that's really there, or just training your brain to build one? This is the answer to that question. It even has a name: the verbal transformation effect. Feed a person the same scrap of sound over and over and over again, and the brain quits hearing noise and starts hearing words. Different words for different people, and every listener supplies the meaning without ever realizing that they did. Want to know how powerful that is? There's a sound on Raudive's tapes he heard clear as a bell as the word Lenin. Other people listened to that very same sound, and here's what they heard: glubo, voom voom, a bullfrog, an elephant call. So the same noise, one man hears a Soviet leader, the next guy hears a zoo. Then comes the big one. Out of all 72,000, Raudive had a favorite, a passage he held up as maybe the finest piece of evidence that he ever caught. It's rich, layered, 5 different languages that are braided together. A researcher named Jürgen Keil took the exact passage, sat down with 8 native German speakers, and listened. Turns out it wasn't 5 languages or a message from beyond. It was actually a radio broadcast, an Easter Sunday church program in German. His crown jewel was a Sunday sermon leaking off the dial, and it just gets sadder from there. In 1997, a psychologist named Imitz Baruch, he sets out to do the one thing that almost nobody bothered to: replicate Raudive the right way. Over 80 recordings of static, careful conditions, and Baruch wanted it to work. He believes in life after death. He respects the big names in the field. Still, he gets nothing. Not a single voice he could honestly call anomalous. The only serious attempt to prove Raudive right proved him wrong. And honestly, just read some of those messages. I follow you tonight. Please interrupt. Let me go home. If the dead finally cracked the wall between their world and ours, that's the best they got? An artist who studied the tapes summed up the content in a single word. He called it imbecilic. And we have a detail that tells you more than any lab result what this obsession actually cost a man. Near the end of his life, Constantine Raudive became convinced that a parakeet, a pet bird, was channeling the voices of the dead in German. So that's the case for the skeptics, and it's brutal. On paper, it's a knockout, except the committee that studied all this, 3 serious men for years, agreed that the voices could be ordinary radio that's heard the same way a grieving man wants to hear it. But they couldn't agree on what it meant. One of them, an engineer, said a genuine result was still quite possible. Another was convinced that one day the tape recorder would be a real line to communicate with the dead somehow. It's strange because static turning into words? Fine. The brain does it all day. But why does the static keep turning into the same word? Why Marguerite again and again and again, tape after tape, the name of one particular dead woman in a particular man's life? Why did a hard-nosed publisher hear his own dead mother clear enough to write it down, telling him to open a door that he had, in fact, been keeping shut? Noise explains gibberish. It has a much harder time explaining hits. And that's the knife's edge that this whole story balanced on for nearly 50 years. The skeptics can account for almost all of it. And almost is exactly the gap where Constantine Raudive still lives. The skeptics said almost, so let's look hard at the part of this story that they've never been able to explain. Start with their best weapon, pareidolia, the brain hearing words and noise. It's a good explanation for faint voices on playback that you have to strain to catch. It falls apart the second the voice actually answers you back, in real time, on command. Meet Annabella Cardozo. She was a career diplomat, an ambassador, a trained linguist. She records what she called direct radio voices. This time it's not fragments of voice on a tape. They're loud, clear voices answering her live, straight out of the speaker. A skeptic might still say she's fooling herself. So one of the most respected psychical researchers in Britain set out to check. A man named David Fontana, a psychology professor, former president of the Society for Psychical Research. He runs a test in her studio, and he doesn't tell her what he's about to do. He speaks to the voices himself, and he asks them to repeat the words back to him in English, and they do. Right then, promptly, loud and clear. You can't pareidolia yourself out of that. She wasn't reading shapes into old static. A voice did what a stranger asked it to do in the moment. And here's the second thing noises can't do. Noises can't turn into a word. It can't turn into a fact that nobody in the room knew was true. In Luxembourg, a group of researchers were recording when a voice cut in that nobody in the room recognized. It gave a name, Henry St. Clair de Ville. Nobody there ever heard of him, so they looked him up. Henry St. Clair de Ville was a real man. He's a French chemist from the 1800s, one of the first people on Earth to study crystalline silicon. The voice said he left this world in 1881. Guess what? Turns out he died in 1881. So a dead stranger, unknown to everybody in that room, gives his name and the year of his death, and they both check out. And it's not new. Go back to 1952. A famous Italian scientist, a priest named Father Gemelli, who ran a major Catholic university, is recording Gregorian chants. A voice breaks into the music. His own dead father, using the pet name he called him as a boy. Gemelli had the recording tested at the university's physics lab. And then, pretty shaken up, he took it to the Pope. And the Pope's answer, oddly enough, wasn't that this is witchcraft. It was that the existence of such a voice is strictly scientific fact. Got that? Now, if you think this is all about a few lonely people talking into their radios, look who keeps taking this seriously. In the 1990s, Britain's oldest body for investigating the paranormal, the Society for Psychical Research, spent years on a case like this. 3 of their most senior people ran it. A professor for electrical engineering, a professor of psychology, a veteran investigator, more than 20 sittings across years. These are people who spent 140 years catching frauds. It's the whole reason the society exists, and at the end of it, they couldn't find one. They reported that they were unable to detect any fraud or deception, and that the evidence pointed to a real intelligence at work. Something they wrote that was interesting to science. In 2021, an institute put up $1.8 million for the best evidence that human consciousness survives death. And the judges were pretty impressive. One of them was a university statistics professor, a past president of the American Statistical Association. The winning entries built the case across 9 different fields. And one of those fields was exactly this: voices and pictures through machines. So no, this isn't looking like a closed case anymore. Serious people with real reputations to lose keep trying to debunk it and fail. But the strangest evidence of all came from a dead man trying to prove that he was still alive. Picture a farmhouse out in rural Pennsylvania. It's run down, the middle of nowhere. It's the dead of night, 2 a.m. A man sits alone in a cluttered room, wall of dials, speakers, and switches. His name is William O'Neill, and on paper, he's a nobody. He's an 8th grade dropout, a tinkerer with a knack for exactly 2 things: electronics and seeing things other people can't. October 27th, 1977, he's been chasing the same impossible idea that Raudive chased, a machine that talks to the dead. And tonight, the machine talks back. A high whining tone fills the room, and then a voice. It's flat, mechanical, like a robot. It says, "Do you hear me now, Bill? Can you hear me, Bill?" O'Neill leans in. He's pretty shaken up. He says, "Yeah, but you make it sound like a robot on television." The first voice called itself Doc Nick. Doc Nick was rough, broken, hard to hold on to, and before long he faded out and someone else took his place. A new voice, clearer, sharper, and a whole lot more particular. He gave a name, Dr. George Jeffries Muller. Now, this one was a professor. One of the very first things Muller does is run a sound check. And here's what a dead man chooses to say to test the equipment. "Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was as white as snow." He drags out the last note to check the audio. Then he says, "Play that back for me, William." "William?" O'Neill fumbles and says, "All right, doctor, I'm sorry, I was lighting a cigarette." The dead scientist scolds him. "Those cigarettes again?" "I don't need to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway." This sounds pretty hard to believe. A voice from beyond the grave doing a sound check and nagging a man about smoking. It's weird because Muller wasn't there to comfort anybody. He was there to work. He treated O'Neill like a slow freshman in his class, counting 1 through 10, demanding frequency changes. It's unbelievable. He's losing his patience. Listen to the real exchange yourself, straight from the tapes. Mueller says, William, I think the big problem is an impedance mismatch into that third transistor. O'Neill responds, third transistor? Mueller says, yes, the transistor that follows the input. O'Neill says, I don't understand. And Mueller snaps, the preamp. And this is a dead man dictating the exact fix down to the exact component. 150 ohm half-watt resistor. It's wired in parallel with a 0.0047 microfarad ceramic capacitor. Got that? William O'Neill is an 8th grade dropout. He doesn't know a microfarad from a hole in the ground. But the dead PhD on the other end of that radio does. And this is the point where, if it's a hoax, it should fall apart. Instead, it turns into the single strongest piece of evidence in this entire story, because Mueller starts handing over his own life, piece by piece, and then he starts daring them to check it out for themselves. He tells them where to find his death certificate. It's issued 1967. They find it. It's real. He gives them his social security number. Again, it's real. He gives them his whole career. A physicist, Cornell, the University of Wisconsin, a NASA consultant who helped fix the way an astronaut's voice warps when he breathes helium. Every piece of it checks out. He tells them to dig up a little booklet that he wrote for the US Army back in the 1940s, and he's exact about it. Pages 66 and 67. Now, the Library of Congress had no record of the thing. They keep hunting anyway because the dead man swears it's real. And then Mueller hands them the detail that should be impossible. He gives O'Neill 2 unlisted telephone numbers. Private lines, never printed in any book, anywhere. One of them, he says, belongs to a Rear Admiral named Stillman, the other to a Dr. Libby. So they check. Rear Admiral Carl Stillman. That number is correct. And Dr. Libby turns out to be Willard Libby, a Nobel Prize winner. And his private unlisted number, that's correct too. A voice on a homemade radio in a Pennsylvania farmhouse at 2 a.m. hands this guy the secret phone number of a Nobel laureate, and it's right. Now, a journalist named John Fuller caught wind of all this, and he came out to debunk it all. He sat up alone late, replaying the first Mueller tape, and here's what a hardened skeptic admitted. It gave him the chills. He tried to fake the voice himself, artificial voice boxes, filters, every trick he had, he couldn't even get close. He had the experts compare the voices. Mueller was not O'Neill, not even in the same neighborhood. He drove out to the farmhouse to catch the con, and he found a broke 8th grade dropout who didn't have the equipment or the genius to fake being a dead physicist dictating capacitor values at 2 a.m. The man who came to debunk it wrote a whole book trying to explain why he couldn't. In April 1982, the businessman who bankrolled all of this, George Meek, he walked into the National Press Club in Washington and he told the world that a machine spoke with the dead. And then he did the one thing that con men never do. He gave the entire thing away. The design he gave away for free. A 100-page manual. He refused to patent it so that any lab on Earth could build one and prove him wrong. What none of them saw coming was that while a dead physicist was debugging a radio in Pennsylvania, over in Europe, the voices started speaking a different name, a name we already know. They were saying Constantine Raudive was on the line. And remember, he's dead. Constantine Raudive died September 2nd, 1974. The thing he started clearly didn't die with him, because over in Europe, a new generation picked up the work, and they pushed it somewhere Raudive never could go. No more faint voices on playback. Toss out the words that you gotta strain to catch. I'm talking live, two-way, out-loud communication. The man leading the charge was a German acoustical engineer named Hans Otto Koenig. Koenig built sound systems for industry, and he engineered a machine far past anything Raudive ever had. It ran on ultrasound, on frequencies too high for human ears to even hear. And Koenig did it live. He took the machine onto live radio. January 15th, 1983, Radio Luxembourg. It's one of the most powerful broadcasting stations in all of Europe. Hundreds of thousands of people are tuned in. This wasn't pre-recorded or edited. It's not rehearsed. It was happening live with half the continent listening, and the station didn't take Koenig's word for it either. Their own engineers set up the equipment, they checked it, they inspected it for tricks. The host, a man named Rainer Holb, told the audience the rules out loud. The station's people asked the questions, not Koenig, and whatever came back would come straight through the speakers in real time for everyone to hear. Sounds pretty straightforward to me. A member of the station staff speaks into the microphone and asks the dead to answer. And within seconds, a clear voice comes through the speaker. Says, Otto Koenig makes wireless with the dead. Another question, another voice. "We hear your voice." And right there, live on the air, the host loses his composure. Rainier Holb's voice is shaking as he cuts in, and he swears to an entire continent of listeners, quote, "I tell you, dear listeners of Radio Luxembourg, and I swear by the life of my children that nothing has been manipulated. There are no tricks. It is a voice, and we do not know from where it comes." So the dead answered on live national radio as loud and clear as the living men asking the questions. And afterward, the station put out an official statement. Every step had been supervised, and their engineers were convinced the voices were real. And it wasn't just the radio. When other researchers traveled to Koenig's to watch in person, the machine did the same thing. The American behind the Spiricom, George Meek, he went to Germany to see it with his own eyes. He inspected the gear himself, and then Koenig flipped the switch and said, "Good afternoon, my dear friends. I have some visitors who'd like to speak with you." Just silence, a faint hiss, and then a loud, clear voice came out of the speaker as if it was standing in the room. "Hello, George." It greeted Meek by name before he said a single word. It's pretty scary. Koenig took the machine on the road to halls, gatherings, and he let the audience ask their own questions out loud right there on the spot. And at one of those gatherings, in the German town of Fulda, a woman in the crowd asked the machine the one question that puts this entire story full circle. She asked if the dead Constantine Raudive would identify himself. And a voice came through that speaker immediately. 3 words, "I am Raudive." And adding a whole new dimension to this inexplicable phenomenon, they still had Raudive's voice. It's recorded from back when he was alive. So they compared the two. The dead voice on the machine and the living voice on the old tape were nearly identical. A Latvian philosopher who spent his whole life, 72,000 recordings of it, chasing the voices of the dead, is now a voice on that machine. He went looking for them, and in the end, he became one of them. Now, where do we stand on all this? Is it nonsense? Maybe. The skeptics were correct about a lot of it. The brain really does hear words and noise. A whole lot of these voices really are junk, and you really should be careful. But that doesn't explain a voice that answered live on national radio clear enough that the host swore on the lives of his own children that nobody faked it. That's a hard pill to swallow. It doesn't explain a screening expert inside a sealed military lab who walked in to debunk it and failed. It doesn't explain a dead scientist handing over the secret unlisted phone number of a Nobel Prize winner and being right. It doesn't explain a voice repeating a stranger's words back to him on command in a language the stranger picked. It doesn't explain a dead chemist giving the year of his own death. For more than a century, science has told us that death is a wall. It's a hard stop, the end of the line. And for more than 60 years now, a small, stubborn handful of serious people have been holding up a recording and asking, what if it isn't? What if the wall has a crack in it? And what if, on the right night, with the right machine, someone on the other side tries to reach back through? The voices are real. That part's not up for debate. They're on the tape. You can hear them yourselves. The only question, the one that's never once been put to rest, is who's doing the talking. Constantine Raudive believed he knew the answer. He spent his entire life proving it. And then on a September afternoon in 1974, he died. And according to the people who were still listening, Constantine Raudive picked up the microphone from the other side. The recordings are still out there. The machines still work. So maybe some quiet night you try it for yourself, or maybe not. It might be a door you don't want to open. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.